All right. Waiting for people to show up. 8:01. We'll start. It's recorded. So, next week's lab. Last week before Thanksgiving break. So we'll collect data on allelopathy. There's also the wind dispersed diaspores that has like a pre-lab to that. It's not necessarily a pre-lab. It tells you what we're going to do that last week and lays out the rules for creating our diaspores. That one's that hasn't been updated. I'm going to try to get that updated so the handout is accessible, 100% accessible. But if not, we'll talk about it next week. Exam is on Friday. So 8 a.m. here. You'll have an hour, or 50 minutes technically. I'll try to get here about 10 minutes before that. That we can, if you want to start early, you can. Format's the same as the other exams. We'll follow the we'll follow kind of like what exam 2 had. There's going to be some of those multiple answer questions that are more like multiple choice where it's just one answer and I tell you which ones those are, so you don't have to worry about trying to rack your brain if there's more than one or more than two answers. So definitions, calculations, bring a calculator. That's on Friday. We have quizzes. We'll have a quiz on lifespans that'll go live today. You'll have until Monday night to finish it, and then Monday night at 11:30, all the quizzes go away. Keys become available. That includes the homework. So on Monday, I'll post the homework keys, which was the population growth homework. That way, you can check your work. If you had the right answers, you probably have the correct work. If you don't, and you're unsure how to arrive at those answers, then you can go ahead and check the work. All right? Audio stream bitrate. Check this out. Guess I have to figure out where that is. Oh well. All right. Also, I posted a announcement. Hopefully you read it, right? So the IDEA evaluations go live on Monday. They're really only useful if we have a suitable response rate. So to encourage that response rate, I'll offer extra credit. This extra credit is based on the percentage of individuals that actually do the IDEA. This isn't extra credit on the final exam, it's extra credit in like the overall course grade. So you can see that's normally like our attendance goes up to 5 points on the exam. Our diaspore lab will be up to 10 points. So the best diaspore in our entire class get 10 points on that final exam. That's actually scales down because it's only fractions, only percentages of the overall course grade. This IDEA evaluation is going to be applied to the overall course grade. So what we'll do is probably Thanksgiving week, we'll take our first look to see what our response rates are, and then that week before finals, we'll check it to see what the response rate is. I will tell you that you're going to get hit with emails until you take it. So, and I believe you get hit with an email for every class that you're in, right? I think you'll get hit with every class that you're in. So one less email if you take it. Check that out. Any questions over material, past material, newer material? All right, so we're going to talk about lifespan. So life history strategies, right? It's that suite of life history traits governed by the environment in which the individual's in. Right. We talked about the VX curves. That's what determines the best strategy, because the VX curves representing reproduction today and future reproduction. So reproduction, the risk of reproducing today versus holding off until tomorrow, basically. We talked about the first part of the life history strategy, which was what? What did we talk about on yesterday? Wednesday. 2 days ago. Okay, life cycles, all right? Development. So should we have a simple life cycle? Should we go for a indirect life cycle? Should we incorporate resting stages? Should we switch our sex, during our life cycle at some point? All right, so we talked about life cycles. Now we're talking about lifespans. And lifespans is essentially how long should we live? How long should we live? Our lifespan, how long we live, is going to be tied to senescence, which is aging, the appearance of aging. So defined in our book is the degenerative changes that increase the mortality rate as an individual's age. That leads to the appearance of aging. And the idea is, if we increase our mortality rates, as we get older and older and older, eventually we're going to get to the point where our chance of dying before that next age category is going to be close to 100. Now, what causes aging? What causes this senescence? It's actually a combination of factors. We have internal factors and external factors, and both of them kind of are getting to the same thing. That aging is due to damage to our cells or damage to the cellular machinery that repairs, that can be used to repair the cells. So what are these items, these factors that cause the damage to the cells? Well, the internal factors, one of the primary ones, are reactive oxygen species, ROSs. These are the oxygen ions, the peroxides that are produced during normal metabolic activity. These are toxic to the cells, and they will damage cellular machinery. And once the cellular machinery is damaged, well, then the cells can't repair themselves. They can't repair themselves, they die, and that ultimately leads to the appearance of aging. So you've probably seen commercials. Take, vitamin E. Protects against these reactive oxygen species. You're gonna see that. Antioxidants. Take the antioxidants. That's what they're trying to protect. You're trying to come up with a way to protect against these reactive oxygen species. So if you think about it, just through normal metabolic processes, since we were developing as an embryo, we're producing these things. We're producing these reactive oxide species, but then our body has ways, our cells has ways to try to capture those to limit their damage. As we age, we become less good at that. We become worse at it. And that means these oxygen species can start to damage the cells. The external factors, I'm sure you've seen some of these, but these are just natural environmental injury that ultimately degrades cellular machinery. Classic one that you hear is UV light, UV radiation. Use sunscreen, protect your skin, fight the appearance of aging. It's probably a commercial. UV light's damaging your DNA. damaged DNA, if it's in a reading frame, it's going to have a hard, won't make that protein that it needs to make. And especially if it's in like a cellular repair pathway, well, that cellular repair is done. So both of these tied to damage to the cells, damage to the cellular machinery. And one could be more dominant today and the other could be more dominant tomorrow. But both of them, basically, damage to our cells leads to the appearance of aging. When you have that, you're going to increase your mortality rates, and that helps to determine our maximum lifespan. Ready? All right, so what ultimately, we know like the ultimate factor, that's this damage. But what really explains aging? Because we've got examples of people living to 100 years plus, and you have some individuals that just they die in their 40s or 50s. So what is it? Why do people age differently? Why do organisms age differently? How do we actually explain it? What's like some of this genetic mechanisms that kind of limit our repair mechanisms and so forth? Well, we have three hypotheses. Mutation accumulation hypothesis, the platropic effects hypothesis, and the limiting Soma hypothesis. And we're going to talk about each of these. Ready? We're going to hit all three of these. So we'll start with the mutation accumulation hypothesis. That's exactly what it says. Okay. So of these theories of aging, the mutation hypothesis is a stochastic process. It's going to say that randomness is going to have an effect on how many mutations develop and their rate of accumulation. So here's how it works. We just talked about how every cell is exposed to these external and internal factors that can damage their cellular machinery. So each cell is subject to these. As the machinery degrades, sometimes you'll get this mutation, somatic mutations. And the mutations can't be repaired because the machinery has been degraded. It's just like UV light or actually your proofreading mechanisms, right? Just cell replication makes a mistake, our proofreading mechanism catches that and fixes it. Well, at this point, it can't fix it because the cellular machinery has been damaged due to our natural injury. We'll say environmental or internal. So reactive oxygen species, UV light, all that, chemicals, who knows? Having one or two of these isn't going to be a problem. But every day we have a chance of this damage. Every day we have a chance of a mutation developing. And through time, you're going to slowly accumulate these mutations to the point where they now alter our appearance. And that altered appearance is aging. As we age, again, we're going to have a decrease in survivorship, increase in mortality rates because of this damage. So I think we have plenty of examples where this could be the case. We see mutations. We see the effect of UV light. We see the effect of reactive oxygen species. So this is theory number one, mutation accumulation hypothesis. And it's random, so that this kind of builds in why some people can live to 100, some people only live to 50. The assumption then is that those that have lived to 50 have accumulated these mutations much more quickly. We can also do the flip side, why sometimes those individuals that are 100 look like they are actually in their 50s. minus plastic surgery. You know that, right? But the idea that some individuals look younger than what they actually are. Those individuals might not have had as many mutations. They might not have been to as much, have been exposed to this natural injury as much that would have damaged their cells. Platropic effects hypothesis relies on pleiotropy. So pleiotropy means that a single gene can affect more than one phenotype. That's our pleiotropy. I think if you've taken genetics, I'm sure you've encountered this term. Don't think that's a term that's introduced in the Bio 1 and 2 courses. But I know genetics talks about it, so if you're in genetics, you may have already talked about it earlier this year. So this is unlike the mutation effects hypothesis. The pleiotropic effects hypothesis is a deterministic theory. So we talked about stochasticity. That's randomness. Deterministic means it's not random. It is programmed. It's going to appear in this specific order. So the pleiotropic effects hypothesis relies on this idea that the genes produce a phenotype, but the phenotype that's being expressed depends on when we are in our life, during our lifespan. So if our bodies are producing reproductive hormones that's getting us ready for sexual maturity and also for reproduction, all of those hormones have an effect on the expression of that one gene. And then as soon as we pass through that reproductive period, those reproductive hormones may go down, and now the gene's going to have a different expression, different effect on our phenotype. So these genes could be good for the organism before and or during reproduction. And then once reproduction is over, their true effects, their true negative effects start to show. The more of these genes that we have, the more of these bad effects that start to be exposed after our reproductive years. That leads to a decrease in survivorship and thus gives the appearance of aging. So it doesn't necessarily mean we have damage to our cells. It's just our phenotypes, our genes are saying, this is what you're going to look like when all these other hormones, all these other characteristics are present. And then once those are gone, this is the second phenotype that we'll start to express. And that second phenotype then, the negative aspects of that gene, they're not shown until after our reproductive years. It's important that if this pleiotropic effects hypothesis is happening and is explaining lifespan in a species, selection can't really take those negative genes out because their negative effects only get exposed after reproduction. So let's go back to this Vx curve. Find a piece of chalk. So let's draw a hypothetical Vx curve. Reproductive value, that's our Vx. What's on the x-axis on these graphs? Age, exactly. All right, and what does the curve usually look like? Kind of like a triangle. All right. Put 100 years at that. All right, so this is our reproductive value. We have reproductive value anytime we have current or future reproduction. So we're building up because at this period in time, we're not quite reproducing. But our survival, we're surviving each year. So we're getting closer and closer to that reproductive age until we hit max. The reproductive prime years. Now, usually this is when we first start reproducing, sexual maturity. And then we're reproducing. We still have Vx, so we can still reproduce. We still have value to the population. If we have these pleiotropic effects, and they get exposed here, and we start seeing negative effects, what can selection do? We still have reproduction, right? So selection can actually act. These individuals that exhibit this gene might not get as much reproduction as individuals that do not have that gene. So over time, selection can slowly take that one out. But if the pleiotropic effects happen here, so at this point, reproduction stops. But we're still alive. We'll say we live to 100. So if our pleiotropic effects happens at that point, can selection act on it? No, why not? Because we've already reproduced. Our genes are already in that next generation. They're in that next generation because they weren't exhibiting their bad effects. Those bad effects, those negative effects didn't appear until after reproduction. They're going to persist in that population until mutation happens to take it out, until gene flow happens to take it out, or genetic drift. Just dumb luck that the individual doesn't get to reproduce. So the pleiotropic effects hypothesis relies on these multiple effects of the genes. And it kind of depends, the effect of selection depends on when are these negative effects exposed. If they're exposed after our reproductive years, they'll persist. If it's during our reproductive years, selection could take them out. That's also why usually you don't see that appearance of aging, a significant appearance of aging, until after reproduction, until after our reproductive years. The third theory is a limiting Soma theory. So this is mostly deterministic. And it's this idea that, well, it goes back to that idea that we have a finite amount of resources. And those resources are allocated between one of our three processes: maintenance, reproduction, and growth. If we invest more energy in one of those three, then there's less energy available to the remaining two processes. So for the limiting Soma theory, it says that as our organism starts to reproduce, it diverts that energy away from maintenance and growth and directs it to reproduction. So now we have this increase in energy being directed to that reproduction. So if you said we were a third to maintenance, third to growth, third to reproduction, limiting Soma theory is saying once we hit reproductive age, we're going to go maybe 60% reproduction, 20% growth, 20% maintenance. That decrease in energy expenditure for the maintenance allows cells to be damaged and not be repaired. And if we're not repairing the damage to our cells, then we're going to slowly increase our mortality rates. And that thus leads to the appearance of aging. So it's based, this whole idea is based on this thought that some organisms, when they reproduce one time. And they basically invest all of their energy into reproduction. And as soon as they reproduce, they die. They go out. And the thought is, the reason they do that is because they've diverted almost all of their energy towards reproduction, and they've just allowed all of the damage that's happening to their cells and cellular machinery to accumulate, and thus that takes them out. So it's a similar idea to that first one, right? The mutation accumulation hypothesis, and where we have the cell damage and the accumulation of the damage, but it's through a different process. Mutation accumulation hypothesis relied on internal and external factors that cause the damage. This limiting Soma theory is saying, no, we've just stopped investing in maintenance and let things run down. If we have this limiting Soma theory then at work in a species, we could then make predictions that those individuals that delay reproduction should live longer, should have a reduced appearance of aging because they're not investing all of their energy early on in life. They're taking care of their maintenance, they're taking care of their growth. So if you take two individuals, you have one that reproduces at age 2 and one that reproduces at age 3. When you're looking at both 2-year individuals, this one should look younger because they haven't switched and diverted energy away from the maintenance. We good? All right, so is aging genetic? So those are the 3 hypotheses. Is one better than the other? No, they're hypotheses. And I think we come up with examples for all 3. I mean, it's at least better than some of the original hypotheses, which said, one of them, and you'll see it. I saw it within the last year. Right? It basically said our heart only has so many beats. Right? Yeah. And they explain it because they say small organisms, we'll use dogs, chihuahuas might not live as long as a bigger dog. And the rationale would be that smaller dogs' heart rate's higher than the bigger dog's heart rate. That must mean that they reach their beat limit earlier in life, and thus they die. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. I just love to encounter a person and say, okay, so how do you explain exercise? Right? Exercise, heart rates go up. So heart rate is going to kill us then? Right? Exercise? Some of you exercise. With every 15 minutes of exercise, you're reducing your life by 5 minutes. Yeah, so we have examples that probably reach each of those 3 hypotheses. All right. Send what's that?
What's the trade-off? How much exercise do you do to shorten your life?
Oh, I was just making those up. To say, if you exercise, your heart rate should go up. More beats per minute, which gets us closer to that limit. Yeah, I mean that was actually a prominent theory. I believe it. It was in some of the biology books. I don't know if our library has any of those old books, but yeah, we laugh about it now. You can laugh about it. In any case, is aging genetic? I mean, I think we can look around and you can see cases where some families, by the time they reach 30 or 40, they look like they're older than what they actually are, and other families, maybe not. So some of those differences might argue that aging could be tied to our genetics. Our genetic code could program part of our lifespan. So what experiments are out there that actually support this idea that lifespan is tied to the genes? Well, we have 2 selection experiments. All right, 2 selection experiments. One was done in 1990s. And this guy just basically went through and took those fruit flies that lived the longest and mated them. Just to see if I take these long-lived fruit flies, do their offspring also live longer and thus if I continue selecting for that long-lived fruit fly adults, will I slowly get to a population that lives longer than our wild-type population? And yeah, he demonstrated it. That demonstrates the effect of selection. Basically, you're selecting those individuals that can live longer, and they pass it on to their offspring, and we can gradually move our population to have a longer lifespan. In this case, it was 30% longer. So that was in a fruit fly. We have an experiment with the nematode, Cenorhabditis elegans. We have some mutants that can live twice as long as the wild-type worms. And again, you select for the mutants, though their offspring will still live twice as long. You cross them, now you start to break up some of those genes, and your offspring might not live as long. So both of these argue for a genetic component. But what's the mechanism? Well, in the fruit flies, it seems like the mechanism, lifespan, is tied to a repair gene. So in some of these fruit flies, or in the selection experiment, these long-lived fruit flies had 3 copies of a repair gene. Not just one. And that was actually beneficial because if you have one copy get a mutation into it and stop its function, you still had 2 other copies that could work. If that second copy gets damaged and no longer works, you still have that last 3rd copy. So it seems like, we might not know if it's mutation accumulation or it's probably not pleiotropic effects. It could be, but it seems like aging is still tied to cellular repair, cellular damage. And if you have more of these repair mechanisms, backup repair mechanisms, you can live longer. So yeah, aging's genetic. We can see it. All right, quick summary for our life cycles, or lifespan. Yeah, aging, senescence, it's caused by a number of factors that increase mortality. Increase mortality as we age. These are internal factors or external factors. Basically, anything that's going to cause damage to our cellular machinery or the cells themselves could generate the aging. Our lifespan does have a genetic component to it. We can select for longer life, at least in some organisms. At least those are good organisms because they have short generation times. Okay. Can't really judge elephants. I mean, they'll probably outlive the researcher. So hard to judge, hard to say on those. But it does look like if it's genetic in those in fruit flies and C. elegans, it's probably also genetic in all other organisms. The cause of senescence, kind of unknown. Right? We've got 3 hypotheses, and they can apply in different organisms. We have examples for each type, and that's why we present all 3. But the key point for this is if we have aging that appears after reproduction, and that aging is negative for us, selection can't remove those negative traits because we've already passed that 0 point. So if those negative effects appear anywhere where we still have some reproductive value, selection can act. Selection acts very slowly if we're up here, but it can still act. If we're down here, when those effects get seen, selection can work very, very quickly. That's why in our evolution we talked about, we normally talked about a phenotype, and we didn't really talk about when those phenotypes appeared because we always assumed that the phenotype was expressed once you were born. So selection can work very, very quickly. Later in life, it takes for that phenotype to appear, the harder it'll be for selection to act because of our reproductive value curves. Questions? All right. This spot marks the end of our Exam 3 material. So I do have a quiz on this that'll be due on Monday. And this will give you time then to study and review this material before our exam on Friday. So I don't think I made that quiz available yet. We will make it available. Make available. All right. It is live. You have until Monday at 11:30 at night to get it done. And then, after that, it goes away. I would suggest starting it before 11:30. You have 8 minutes. And on all these quizzes, and if there was any mistake on it, but on all these quizzes, I'm making it so if Wi-Fi goes down or something like that, if you get disconnected, you can always go back in and pick up where you left off. The timer's still going, unfortunately, but I have it so that if you get kicked off, you can come back and take it until the timer expires. So if you start right at 11:29 and that happens to you, and you try to get back in at 11:32, you can't do it because the quiz is going away. So I suggest giving yourself at least 10 minutes before. So if something like that happens, you can still access the quiz. It's 8 minutes. Not too much because, I mean, if you think about it, this was 8 slides total. And that was, we have a title slide too. All right, quiz, attendance quiz. Attendance quiz has some terms on it that we've encountered, 4 out of 5. You can look at it. Hopefully when you see the terms on our attendance quiz, you'll be able to think of some of the answers, think of their definition. So the answer today is continental climate. Continental climate. That's our answer today. Continental climate. Exactly. Lily said it's very relatable these past few weeks. Exactly. That's once you all were done with the quiz, I was going to ask, why do you think I did continental climate? For that reason. You get up to like mid-upper 70s, and then you wake up in the morning and it's 40 degrees. Huge swing in temperatures. And you can feel it. I think today is supposed to get up to maybe 70 degrees, but as soon as that sun goes down, an hour after that sun goes down, we've already dropped close to 10 degrees. That's continental climate. That's us. All right? So looking ahead, we have our exam on Friday. What about lecture material? We haven't talked about reproduction as part of life history. We're going to talk about reproduction, reproductive strategies, and we're going to relate that back to survivorship curves. And we're going to relate it back to population growth. So we're going to come back to all of these things as a way to explain some of these life history strategies, or at least they're correlated. Life history strategies are correlated with the survivorship curves. They're correlated with some of their like dispersal ability and so forth. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about, move towards some of the communities and start talking about niches, niche space, and some competition, effects of competition when we have these different niches. I've already looked ahead. The plan is to have our lecture material done. The latest will be that Wednesday of our last week. That's the latest. I think we'll be able to finish it up on that Monday. But we'll go into it. So that means then we could use that Wednesday and Friday to answer questions that you may have to go over the final, because our final's on Monday morning, 8 a.m. All right? All right. Let's be done. It's Friday. It's Friday. Enjoy the weekend.